So this is an example of how you could be misled by your observations and assume that it's a contagious process that passes an illness between people, when in actuality it is that they had a common exposure to some kind of toxic insult that caused the problem.
All at the same time in mass? Okay, so let me just play devil's advocate. So are there things in life that cause contagion? Like, let's say, people call it the Spanish flu of 1918. Was that actually a contagious event?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because there is a book called The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg, and it describes that right after the Spanish flu pandemic, which, by the way, resulted in 50 million deaths.
Right.
Okay, so that is way, 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 way more than our current situation. But the U.S. Public Health Service, they did a series of 3 experiments with people. They did some additional animal experiments as well. But the experiments with the humans, they had 100 healthy subjects, and then they had several people who were sick with the flu. So what they did is they had the people who were sick with the flu cough up as much nasty stuff as they could. They put swabs in their nose to collect the snot. They even swabbed their eyeballs. So they were trying to collect all of the particles that they thought were infectious that they could then deliver to a healthy person and make them sick. So in the first experiment, what they did is they squirted these secretions into the nose, eyes, and throat of the healthy people. And out of those 100 healthy people, not one of them became ill with the flu. So they thought, well, we need to try harder, and they devised a second experiment. In the second experiment, they took the same secretions from the sick person who was coughing and sneezing and tearing, and they then injected that into the healthy subjects. And once again, none of the subjects became ill with the flu. So they devised a third experiment thinking that perhaps a more natural, casual human contact is required for transmission of the disease. And so what they did is they had the person who was sick with the flu sit really close, like uncomfortably close to the healthy subject. And they had a conversation for like 5 or 10 minutes. I forget the exact time. And then after that, they had the sick individual take a deep breath in and the healthy individual take a deep breath out. And they put their lips together almost as if they were kissing, but no contact. And the sick person blew all of his breath into the healthy person who inhaled it all. And the results of that experiment once again showed that none of the healthy subjects became ill. So I've tried very hard to find additional experiments where they tested this theory about contagion of infectious agents. And I could not find any conclusive studies that proved contagion exists.
Why viral? Because the people are poisoned, they excrete toxins, they look like viruses. People think it's a flu epidemic. In the 1918 epidemic, the Boston Health Department decided to investigate the contagiousness of this. So they, believe it or not, took hundreds of people with the flu and they sucked the snot out of their nose and injected it into the healthy people who didn't have the flu, and not one time could they make the next person sick. They did this over and over again, and they were not able to demonstrate contagion. They even did it with horses who apparently got the Spanish flu, and they put bags over their head, and the horses sneezed in the bag, and they put the bag over the next horse, and not one horse got sick. You can read about this in a book called The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg, who chronicles all the steps in the electrification of the earth and how within 6 months there was a new flu pandemic all over the world. And when you hear the normal explanations, how did it go from Kansas to South Africa in 2 weeks? So the entire world got the symptoms at the same time, in spite of the fact that the mode of transportation was horseback and boats, and there's no explanation for it. They just say, we don't know how that happened.
Germ theory has been so widely accepted as a fundamental principle that all of our other scientific knowledge is based upon, there has been no effort or funding or research done to look for an alternative cause.
And why do you think that is?
Well, from the point of view of scientists, since they accept that the virus causes the disease, there would be no point in doing other research to look at other potential causes. And so they spend their research efforts to learn more about these particles that they're calling viruses. And furthermore, the way research is done is that because scientific research is extremely expensive. So there are some private foundations with endowments that do fund a very, very small percentage of the scientific research, but the overwhelming majority is funded by government grants. And the way this apparatus works is that the different government agencies that are part of the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, they have specific research goals and areas that they want to study. So they put out these publications that describe the type of subjects that they want research done, and that's what they're going to fund. So they're not putting out grants to look for alternative causes of these diseases because they're not interested in that.
The sad part is that government health agencies are revolving doors for big pharma executives with major shareholdings, whose interests lie in profiting from multi-billion-dollar annual sales of vaccines, antibiotics, prescriptions, and over-the-counter remedies. They have no interest in committing financial self-destruction or industry suicide by funding more studies that disprove the germ theory. More frightening is the fact that the world is on government-ordered lockdown and people are afraid to stand 6 feet from each other over an unproven virus with very little symptoms and an extremely low mortality rate of only 240,000 people dead in over 4.5 months. While during the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, which was allegedly so contagious and deadly, it killed 50 or 60 million people in just a few months, scientific experiments weren't able to infect even one person or horse in many, many hundreds of attempts of prolonged intimate physical contact, even by injection. Let that sink in. Just for the record, 1918 was the coldest winter on record until 1938, 1960, and 1979. So people were indoors and lacking vitamin D from sun exposure. As Arthur Furstenberg wrote in The Invisible Rainbow, in 2001, Canadian astronomer Ken Tapping showed that the influenza pandemics over the previous 300 years correlated with peaks in solar magnetic activity on an 11-year cycle. Once again, 1918, 1938, 1960, and 1979 correlate. It has also been found that some outbreaks of influenza spread over enormous areas in just a few days, a fact that is difficult to explain by contagion from one person to another. Also, numerous experiments seeking to prove direct contagion through close contact, droplets of mucus, or other processes have proved fruitless. From 1933 to the present day, virologists have been unable to present any experimental study proving that influenza spreads through normal contact between people. All attempts to do so have met with failure. On top of that, wireless radio transmitters replacing the old wired telegraph system were put up all over the world at around that same time, adding a new cellular biological toxin we had yet to evolve through.